Okay, so, spoilers for all of Rogue One, you guys. The movie came out in 2016, but if you still haven't seen it for some reason, I'm spoiling this entire movie. And as always, I don't know shit about shit, these are just my opinions and the things I like about Star Wars. I haven't read or watched much beyond the actual films, I have not seen Rebels, I have not read any X-Wing novels from the 80s. Please be chill, kids. Okay, so. People like Star Wars, yeah? I think that's a pretty safe statement to make. I mean, in the wake of the absolutely bug-nuts, batshit reactions to The Last Jedi, I think it's safe to say that people are pretty passionate about Star Wars. If Disney has their way, we're gonna have Star Wars until we die. Whether you want an edgy trilogy written by the dudes who wrote this iconic scene, or not. Now, everybody has their own opinion on what's the best Star Wars movie. A lot of diehard fans from back in the day will say it was Empire Strikes Back, while a lot of people my age discovered Star Wars with the prequels and Attack of the Clones, which is a choice.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.
But whatever. Now a whole new generation of kids are discovering Star Wars with the new movies, and I bet a lot of kids really love Force Awakens. As for me, well, strap in, kids, and get ready to get blown up by a disco ball, because today we're talking about my favorite Star Wars movie, Rogue One. So I did start the conversation by talking about the quote-unquote best Star Wars movie, and now you might be asking, Lady Knight the Brave, are you saying Rogue One is the best Star Wars movie? No. I mean, the best in terms of structure and storytelling is probably A New Hope or something, I don't know. But I do know Rogue One might be my favorite of the bunch. And I have a lot of reasons for that. A lot of them extremely personal. A lot of them are like, yeah. So let's start with the basics. This movie was directed by Gareth Edwards and was yet another Star Award that the team threw at a mildly inexperienced white guy with one beloved indie film and one mediocre big-budget film under his belt. The other obvious example being Colin Trevorrow, who was removed from Episode 9 because, well, come to this door. And to a lesser degree, Rian Johnson would also fall into this category, although he had at least directed 3 films of increasing budget prior to The Last Jedi. I'm not going to get into whatever the fuck Disney is doing with Star Wars these days, mostly because I don't know if Disney knows what the fuck they're doing with Star Wars these days. I only bring it up because on top of Colin Trevorrow being removed from Episode 9 and Lord and Miller being removed from Solo midway through filming, Gareth Edwards was largely absent from this film's reshoots because it would seem that either Disney or Kathleen Kennedy liked the idea of hiring artistic indie directors for big-budget movies and then got freaked out by their vision for the piece or their inexperience, or maybe both?
Both is good.
We have no idea what Episode 9 was looking like before Trevorrow was removed from the film, but pieces of Lord and Miller's work on Solo remain in the final film alongside the work Ron Howard did after them, which makes for a slightly bewildering film, honestly. Now, on Rogue One, Gareth Edwards directed a script written by Chris Weitz with story ideas from John Knoll and Gary Whitta. I can tell you I've seen good movies with even more screenwriters, so it's unfair to call this a situation of too many cooks, but here's what we can say for sure. Gareth Edwards directed the well-received indie film Monster in 2010, and then the slightly bland 2014 Godzilla before he was hired on to direct the first Star Wars spin-off movie in May of 2014. The movie went into production sometime in 2015, and then in May 2016, reshoots were ordered by Disney with Tony Gilroy coming in to oversee them. He's given a screenplay credit for his efforts, and well, reshoots are not automatically a bad thing. Sometimes movies need reshoots. It's fine and normal. But it's fair to say this movie changed somewhat with those reshoots, and nobody can seem to agree how much. Gareth Edwards called the process of making a Star Wars film a team sport, and Tony Gilroy described the state of the film when he was brought in for reshoots as a mess. Consequently, Tony Gilroy is largely absent from the behind-the-scenes materials on the DVD, and the reshoots go mostly unmentioned. We do know that there was a very, interesting pre-viz storyboarding process. Editor Colin Goody said, "There was no screenplay, there was just a story breakdown at that point, scene by scene. Gareth Edwards got me to rip hundreds of movies and basically make Rogue One using other films so that they could work out how much dialogue they actually needed in the film. In fairness, it's not totally unheard of to shoot without a script. Everybody's favorite movie Mad Max Fury Road was shot without one, although it does worry me that any director would use such a method for previs because I can't imagine that it lends itself well to original visuals or organic dialogue. But that's neither here nor there. In the same interview with the editors, they said that there was always a plan to shoot pickups. Then in May, it was announced that Disney wanted reshoots to lighten the mood, bring some levity into the story, and restore a sense of fun to the adventure. And apparently, that necessitated a lot of changes. We know that a lot of the third act changed in those reshoots. Locations of certain scenes changed, characters were moved around. The biggest indication of all those changes comes from that first teaser trailer. So, I have to talk about this trailer for a minute because, well, first off, because it's a phenomenal trailer. Like, ooh, when those klaxons start going... Mwah, chef's kiss. That shit is perfection. But also, while I don't want to spend this entire video bemoaning what this movie could have been, I do find it interesting to discuss the movie's somewhat troubled production and the movie this might have been at one point. I don't know that it would have been a better movie, but it would have been a different one. So the trailer begins with this quiet voiceover introducing Jin. In earlier versions of the script, Jin was actually a sergeant in the rebellion and not a criminal, so there's this line.
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel.
Then we get some dramatic music in the premise of the movie.
A major weapons test is imminent.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Then we get to the klaxon alarms and a lot of really cool shots like this one, or this one. And we hear Forrest Whitaker asking,
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you? If you continue to fight, what will you become?
Also, there's a really neat little parallel with the first shot we see of Jin and this one. Damn, that's a fine trailer. I want to shake the hand of whoever made it. And so we know that in one version of the movie, we got bald Forrest Whitaker, Jin being part of the rebellion, the whole gang running around on the beach in the final act, and then reshoots happened. There are more rumors about what was and wasn't in the first version of this movie, but that's when we start getting into a source said this and rumors and so on, and I'm trying not to get into tin hat territory here. Also, I'm shipper trash, so I'll always be sad that they cut this line that was in the theatrical trailer.
Are you with me?
All the way.
So now let's talk about the actual movie. So Rogue One takes place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. It follows anti-heroine Jyn Erso as she and a mismatched band of compatriots steal the Death Star plans and... die. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's meet the cast. At the top, there's Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones. She's a hardened criminal who's been living by the skin of her teeth since she was a child. It takes this misfit band and a few long-held truths to help her find a cause to fight for. Then we have Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna. He's a spy for the rebellion and one of my favorite characters because he's loyal to a cause that he thinks is just, and that means he might shoot an innocent man in the back if that will serve the greater good. But it doesn't mean he likes it. Cassian's getting his own TV show soon on the new Disney streaming service, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with it. I love Diego Luna in this role, and I love the complexity of this character.
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old.
We only got a few moments in the film that really brought it to the surface, but I hope the show explores more of the moral grays that Cassian's been living in all of his life. Also, I really love Diego Luna and his fetish for Jabba the Hutt.
And the texture. I'm very curious to actually touch that texture.
Let Diego Luna touch Jabba the Hutt, please. Then we have Cassian's droid, K2SO, played by Alan Tudyk. I'm pretty sure K2 is everybody's favorite character. I sure do love this cranky droid. I don't have much else to add other than Alan Tudyk had to play him wearing a unitard and stilts,
So yeah, you were eye level with his balls, basically.
Yeah. Then there's Bodhi Rook, played by Riz Ahmed. We're going to talk about Bodhi more later, since I believe his character had a lot of underutilized potential, but I still love him, and Riz Ahmed is great.
Does Riz Ahmed drink alcohol? That sounds like that's what my mum's been Googling. That's so depressing. Why don't I have fans? Why is it just my family members Googling me to find out how religiously observant I am?
There's Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus, played by Donnie Yen and Jiang Wen respectively. They are the Guardians of the Wills, monks from this temple that gets blown to hell along with the rest of Jedha. They're badass and probably married.
I'm gonna follow Jin! Along the luck! I don't need luck! I have you!
And I love them very much. Also, Jiang Wen doesn't speak a lot of English, so please watch him trying to explain his character and not spoil anything about the film at this panel.
Baze has a gun. He has a gun. He has a huge gun. Is that right? Okay.
Oh bless. There's Jin's dad Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen. There's Saw Gerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker. And lastly, we have Orson Krennic, the villain, played by Ben Mendelsohn. Apparently Ben Mendelsohn is exclusively playing lisping middle management villains these days, which is wild, but he's very good at it. I mean, we also have terrifying video game cutscene versions of Carrie Fisher and Peter Cushing, and they should have just let Guy Henry play Tarkin, but let's not worry about them just yet. So the movie begins like this. This was the first Star Wars to be released independently of the main saga, and the film announces itself as such right away. Composer Michael Giacchino was brought in when the reshoots forced composer Alexandre Desplat to drop out of the film, and he had 4 weeks to compose a score, and I love Giacchino's work on Star Trek, and he's a super talented composer who really loves punny track titles like Enterprising Young Men or Go Do That E Do That You Do So Well. Just go watch YouTuber Sideways' video on the score for Rogue One. It's cool. I'll wait. So anyway, the movie begins like this, and we're introduced to this adorable little baby girl. This is Jyn Erso, and her life is about to get torn to shreds. Her father, Galen, left the Empire and his work behind, but the Empire comes looking for them in the form of Krennic and his Death Troopers. They try to escape, but in the end, all they can do is hide Jyn and face them. Her mother is killed and her father is taken. But before she died, Jin's mother Lyra sent a message to an old friend named Saw Gerrera. He's the one who comes and rescues Jyn from their home planet of Lamu. Flash forward about 15 years and Jyn is in an Imperial prison on Wobani. And I'm just going to say here and now that one of my issues with the structure of this movie is just how many planets we hop between in the first, 30 minutes. Maybe a diehard fan knows the importance of the Rings of Kafrene, but I sure don't, and it feels a little dislocating and unnecessary. We jump from Lamu to Wobani to the Rings of Kafrene to Jedha to Yavin 4. It's kind of a lot. But anyway, on Wobani, the rebellion breaks Jyn Erso out of a labor camp. She's not really into that, but she's forced to come along.
Congratulations. You are being rescued.
On the Rings of Kafrene, Cassian Andor meets a man who has information about how the Empire is building a weapon, and some pilot defected to Jedha with more information. Cassian kills that guy so they both don't get caught by stormtroopers. On Jedha, Bodhi Rook tries to deliver a message from Galen Erso.
He told me to find you.
It does not go well. On Yavin 4, Jyn agrees to help the rebellion meet with Saw Gerrera and find her father in exchange for her freedom. Unbeknownst to her, Cassian has been given orders to shoot her father on sight. So Cassian, Jyn, and K2SO go to Jedha.
Why does she get a blaster and I don't?
Trust goes both ways.
Would you like to know the probability of her using it against you? It's very high.
There, they end up in the middle of a firefight between Gerrera's rebels and the Imperials occupying the city. The fight has a lot of cool moments, but our big takeaways are that Jyn kicks ass and Cassian might be getting attached.
Get out of there!
Also, this bit was improvised by Alan Tudyk, and Diego Luna nearly breaks during the scene, and it's hilarious.
And there's a fresh one if you mouth off again.
From there, they meet these two.
One hostile.
He's with us.
Be alright.
And then all 4 of them get taken to Saw's base.
Are you kidding me? I'm blind!
There, they meet Bodhi, who is in slightly bad shape. And Jyn finally receives her father's message. She learns that he built the Empire's new weapon, and there's a flaw built in, one that can destroy it. Then the Death Star blows up Jedha, and Jyn, Cassian, Bodhi, K2, Chirrut, and Baze all just barely escape with their lives. They head to Edu, where her father is. It goes bad. The rebellion shows up and blows the place to hell, killing Jin's father. They all fight, go back to Yavin 4, and Jyn tries to convince the rebellion to go along with her father's plot to get the Death Star plan so they can blow it up.
The time to fight is now!
And they say no. Behind their backs, Cassian gets a ragtag band together to do the thing because he knows it's the right thing to do.
I'm not used to people sticking around when things go bad.
Welcome home.
And then they go get the plans from Scarif. And yeah, let's save that part for later. So, Rogue One introduces a lot of characters. In fairness, the original Star Wars introduces us to at least as many within the first 40 minutes. My issue is mainly in the development of these characters and the structure of the story. So let's take a minute to talk story structure. If you've taken a high school literature class, you've probably heard something about the narrative arc or seen some version of this little line guy right here. Now, not every story needs this structure, but your standard action movie popcorn fare does work better using it. Most stories can be traced along this line with the exception of some more experimental novels or films. I mean, in the case of Star Wars, we could get really in-depth with the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell, but let's keep it simple and look at a basic narrative arc. And for our example, let's look at A New Hope. So right here is our exposition, the scene setting of the movie that sets up the world and the characters. In A New Hope, this comes after an in media res prologue with Princess Leia and some bits with the droids. We don't get to the exposition stuff until we meet our protagonist Luke Skywalker at around the 17-minute mark. Then, for our narrative arc, we have the inciting incident. That's the event that makes the story really start. In A New Hope, that's meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi and the death of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. From there, we get the rising action, which is basically a series of events or incidents of increasing difficulty and tension for our hero. For Luke, that's all the stuff from the bar in Mos Eisley to rescuing Princess Leia to the death of Obi-Wan and escaping the Death Star. All of that leads us to the climax, the final turning point of the story, i.e. Luke using the Force to blow up the Death Star. From there, it's the falling action in denouement, which is the resolution of the story and the medal ceremony and so on. That's a basic narrative structure. Or, to put it in even simpler terms, stories need a beginning, middle, and end. And not only does a story need that arc, so do the characters. You can develop characters with flashbacks or dialogue or whatever, but it should be in service of a clear arc for that character. One with a beginning, middle, and end. The only character in Rogue One with an arc that's even close is Cassian Andor. Not Jyn Erso. So let's talk about Jyn Erso. We're introduced to her as an adult in prison. She doesn't do or say much, although she doesn't seem to be happy with her present circumstances. When she gets freed/captured by the rebellion, she expresses a similar antipathy towards them, and we learn she doesn't care for any cause.
I've never had the luxury of political opinions.
And she only agrees to help them in exchange for her freedom. That is her inciting incident. On Jedha, we see that she's resourceful and quick in a fight and also prone to sympathy, at least for kids. But she is adamantly against fighting for her cause.
You can stand to see the Imperial flag reign across the galaxy.
It's not a problem if you don't look up.
Finally, she gets to view the message from her father, and she goes directly from a survivalist apathy to desperately wanting to carry out his mission.
They call it the Death Star, but they have no idea there's a way to defeat it.
She also wants to rescue her dad, and when that fails, she goes even harder on the heroics. To say the shift is abrupt would be a bit of an understatement. I think that rescuing her dad energy was supposed to be the middle point, but it doesn't quite sell. In one scene, we basically go from this...
Not a problem if you don't look up.
...to this.
I need to send word to the Alliance. They have to know there's a way to destroy this thing. They have to go to Scarif to get the plans.
It's all part of the rising action, but this turn happens so suddenly it feels like a climax for her character, which isn't great since we're not even halfway through the film. It evens out by the end because once she has that final goal, carrying out her father's mission, it drives the whole end of the film, which is, yeah. Meanwhile, Cassian Andor gets probably the clearest development of any of the characters. We get a really dynamic, layered introduction with this moment.
We'll be alright.
We see him at the rebel base questioning Jyn and then getting the order to kill her father. And also, we can tell that K2 is probably the closest thing he has to any kind of friend or companion. They bicker with a familiarity that speaks to a lot of years together.
Well, now there's a 35% chance of
I don't want to know. Thank you.
I understand.
The three of them go off to Jedha, and he's mostly just in fix-it mode here, trying to keep Jyn from getting killed and getting them all out of danger. although we already see flashes of his central conflict with him going against orders or endangering his mission just to keep Jin safe. That guy he shot there was one of Saw's men and the reason they end up getting taken captive later. In Saw's base, his first thought once the place starts coming down is to get Jin. It's easy to interpret some of this as protecting an asset for the mission, but clearly it's more than that.
Where are you going?
I gotta find Jin.
His big growth moment comes on Edu, when he disobeys orders and lets Galen live, and then even more so with this scene.
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old.
We learn a lot about Cassian in this scene, just from the performance of Diego Luna and a few sparse lines, but it's enough to give a real sense of character as he tries to justify his actions and the actions of his people.
I had orders that I disobeyed.
Some of them are justifiable, and some aren't. And he knows that.
You're not the only one who lost everything. Some of us just decided to do something about it.
And then back on the rebel base, while Jin preaches to a room about the rebellion she just joined, Cassian gathers a Ragtag team together to help carry out the mission.
I'd like to volunteer. We've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion. And every time I walked away from something I wanted to forget, I told myself it was for a cause that I believed in.
The difference between Jin and Cassian's development is that there is a middle point. For Cassian, we get a beginning on the Rings of Kafrene that really establishes the character and his devotion to his cause. Then across Jedha and Edu, we see stages of him disobeying orders and endangering their mission to protect Jin or to ease his own conscience, right up to the point where he tries to ignore or excuse the rebellion murdering Jin's father. You could easily put his arc on one of those storylines you see with little arrows pointing to the rising action, climax, and resolution. His arc resolves when he chooses to rebel against his own cause to do what's right. His whole arc has a clear beginning, middle, and end. Jin's arc is that she's apathetic about the world and then her dad died and she isn't. If there had been one scene of her doubting herself, doubting her father, or something after receiving her father's message, this could have been fixed. But now it's abrupt in a way that feels rough and unfinished. Then we get to Bodhi Rook. So I don't know if you've noticed, but Star Wars does love a trio, and Bodhi is the final major piece of what I think was intended to be this film's trio. He's also one of the biggest examples of potential and missed opportunity in the film, because Bodhi's the reason this movie even happens. His defecting from the Empire with the message from Galen is what makes the whole movie go. So let's look at Bodhi's development then. Before the movie begins, he befriends Jin's father, Galen Erso, and defects from the Empire with a message for Saw Gerrera. A cool start for the character, except we are shown none of this and are only told it in a few lines midway through the film.
Your father, he said I could get right by myself.
What we know at the start is that he defected,
An Imperial pilot. He defected yesterday.
and then he's taken by Saw Gerrera's men and subjected to the worst part of this movie. I hate Borgullet, you guys. It gives me traumatic hentai flashbacks, but if it was just weird, that wouldn't be a crime. No. The crime is that we are told this thing will drive a man mad.
The unfortunate side effect is that one tends to lose one's mind.
But when we see Bodhi again, he seems maybe a little off.
I'm the pilot.
By the end of this scene, he's fine. He stutters a lot, but he's fine.
We have the plans. They found the Death Star plans. They have to transmit them from the communications tower.
And based on his behavior in this scene...
As for you, Galen Erso, he told me to find you.
I think Bodhi's just an anxious person, so what did this do to him that, regular torture wouldn't have achieved? I'm not advocating for showing graphic torture in a Star War, but if the idea was for them to find Bodhi roughed up and scared in a cell, what does this scene add? Why couldn't we have just had this scene here, and then found him here? We could have extrapolated he'd been through something bad and not been subjected to the worst scene ever that ends up not mattering. Often when I've shown Rogue One to friends, I just apologize for this scene because it's weird and uncomfortable and irrelevant. But after we get the weird tentacle bullshit, Bodhi is yanked from his cell by Cassian and the gang, right as Jedha is being blown up. Did you know Jedha is Bodhi's home planet? There's a blink and you miss it line establishing that.
Bodhi, Rook, local boy, huh?
We don't really get much of a moment to say how Bodhi feels about the destruction of his home planet beyond this look right here when Baze and Chirrut are talking about it.
The whole city?
All of it.
These three share a home planet that just got destroyed, and this movie kind of blows past that after these few lines. We know from the novelization that he had a mother living on Jedha, and maybe other family as well. We know from the film that it was an Imperial-occupied planet, and Woulde ended up working for the people that occupied his home and filled it with volatile soldiers while siphoning its resources. The movie does nothing with any of that, and after Jedha, Woulde is mostly along for the ride, joining the gang as they head to the final confrontation on Scarif. He gets to drop the title of the movie,
Rogue One,
and then die apart from all the other characters who never noticed he died in spite of the fact that everybody was communicating over those walkie-talkies during the entire finale, and it would have been really easy to have Jyn and Cassian try to check in, get radio silence, and exchange ominous, sad looks. This is what I mean about missed potential. This movie is loaded with these kinds of structural issues that were maybe addressed in the original version of the film, or maybe they were never thought of at all. Certain characters changed so much, it's hard to say how much their growth is just a victim of script changes that weren't thought out enough during the rush of reshoots. And when I say structure, I mean we spent so much of this movie racing from one set piece to the next, and we didn't need to. Saw Gerrera's character either needed more screen time or less. I know the character's from one of the cartoons, but his appearance in the film is so odd. It's given such weight with strange allusions to Darth Vader for some reason. And then after 2 or 3 scenes, he dies. We know he raised Jyn, but we never see any of that. We never see him abandoning her when she was around 16 or so. We're told most of this in a few scattered lines.
I was protecting you!
You dumped me!
But that's it. And then he dies with these inspirational words.
Save the rebellion! Save the dream!
Which, again, would have had more meaning if we knew the character better. And then after seeing Galen's message on Jedha, Eadu mostly feels like a repeat of some of the same story beats for Jyn. She cries over her father, and Cassian pulls her out of danger as the place they're in gets blown to shit. Run and reset. There's a lot of business on Eadu, but it's so muddled it took me several viewings to realize I think Woulde and K2 stole them all some kind of Imperial shuttle off screen while Jyn and her dad were getting blown up. A lot of Cassian's development happens on Eadu, but this section of the movie drags and it's so dark it's honestly hard to see half of it, and half the interesting bits happen off screen. Generally, I would say Star Wars movies often work on the strength of the relationships between the characters, and while there is definitely chemistry with this cast, the movie never has the time to let it breathe and blossom because it's so busy running to the next big action moment. Bodhi Rook befriended Jin's dad while working for the Empire, and then he was tortured by her foster father. I think that merits more than a few lines of dialogue between these two. Can you imagine if an actual brother-sister dynamic emerged just from Bodhi's time spent with Galen that Jyn never had? What about Chirrut and Baze? They've apparently been together for quite some years, and they grew up in that monastery place that we never got a look at, which had some religious value. At least for Chirrut, since Baze's faith seems to have lapsed. The most we get about all that is this line.
Baze Malvis was once the most devoted guardian of us all.
If the film had taken more time to build up these characters and their relationships, the tragedy of their inevitable demise would have hit even harder beyond the shock value of characters dying in a Star War. Honestly, of the stuff we lost in the reshoots, I mourn the team running and gunning across the beach together the most because it would have been a real moment to see them fighting together as a team. The finale does have them all working in sync for a common goal, but it separates them the moment they land on Scarif. We never get to see the gang on screen, physically working together. I wish Jyn and Cassian could have spent a few more minutes here and, I don't know, maybe lost a little of the business up at the tower where Jyn spends 10 minutes getting shot at, running to some other console and pressing buttons to make a thing happen. Now all of that was me really tearing this movie a new one, and I have a feeling some of you are starting to wonder how or why I like this movie. So now let's talk about nostalgia. If you're wondering at this point whether or not I really like this movie and if this video is some kind of elaborate prank, well, I do like this movie. But there's some things I've got to address as fandoms continue to lap up multi-million-dollar corporations weaponizing nostalgia for profit. The act of referencing something familiar for the cheap aha moment an audience has when they recognize that thing is, well, a fancy word for it is intertextuality, and, okay, let's go for an easy example.
Hey, you just got yourself.
No. Sorry. We don't want any trouble, sorry.
Hey, look, it's that guy, all the audience says. A flash of recognition reminds you of a familiar thing that you hold dearly. Oh wow, cool, I remember this guy. Obi-Wan chopped his arm off in A New Hope. But don't think too hard about it, kids, because what's he doing on Jedha? How does he get from here to Tatooine? I hope he's heading straight for his shuttle now, otherwise I wonder how he didn't get blown up with the rest of Jedha. There's nothing inherently wrong with having this guy here, or having C-3PO and R2-D2 on Yavin 4, but it is just fan service. One could argue this whole film is fan service, although I would disagree. I mean, this entire film was built to answer a silly question that fans of Star Wars have been joking or complaining about for years, but it introduces new characters and tells an entirely new story. One that slots in pretty neatly with what we already knew, sure, but you could watch Rogue One entirely on its own with no knowledge of the other films, and ostensibly, you could still enjoy it. See, that's the difference. One type of intertextuality is basically going, hey, look, a thing you recognize. And the other is actually doing more by taking some familiar bits and making something new. There's been a lot of people in fandom lately who like to argue, this does not change the status quo of my fiction as I know it, and therefore, it's good. I have had people try to tell me that Revenge of the Sith is a good movie. It's not. It's a better movie than Attack of the Clones, but that's a pretty low bar, and Revenge of the Sith really only succeeds on the basis of this moment. Because we've been waiting 3 movies to see Anakin become the familiar character we know, and seeing it happen is satisfying. That doesn't make the rest of the movie good. In the age of remakes, reboots, prequels, midquels, and sequels, I find it amazing how often people are satisfied to have something they know regurgitated back at them and call it a day. If you're going to make a sequel or a reboot, why not do something different with the material? Something unexpected. Make Maleficent the hero of your story, or do a Ghostbusters entirely about women. What's the point of a new Beauty and the Beast if it's not going to say something new? There were minor changes, of course, some added backstory, and apparently LeFou's great gay representation, but the story as a whole was still largely unchanged. The central message of loving what's inside rather than the external is still the same, and the approach it takes to get there is largely the same. Compare that to, for instance, 2017's The Shape of Water, a Beauty and the Beast story that goes to some different places to talk about not only loving what's inside a person or a fish monster, but also the struggles of being an outcast. I'm not saying Disney needs to make a movie where Sally Hawkins fucks a fishman, but I do think movie studios in general like to play it safe, and that often leads to tired, unoriginal cinema. In the case of Rogue One, I feel that many people like it simply because it answers an old question from the original trilogy. Why do the Death Star have a hole in it? Well, it was an elaborate failsafe built in by its creator so the rebellion could destroy it. Cool. I feel that some people might like it for all the Darth Vader and this, I guess. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think we needed Tarkin in this movie, or at least not this much. The Uncanny Valley is real and it's here, and I kind of wish he had one scene and then was gone, but I know some fans were pleased to see him, and pleased to see Vader making dad jokes and kicking ass.
Be careful not to choke on your aspirations.
Maybe they were happy to see 3PO and these guys, and that's nice. It's valid. But I would argue what makes Rogue One great is the new stuff. This entirely new set of characters who don't give a flying fuck about a Skywalker because they have their own, completely new set of conflicts to work through. While this movie does not change the status quo of Star Wars, it's still saying something new. It makes me think of a quote from Emily Wilson's 2018 translation of Homer's The Odyssey. Tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost when he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went and who he met, the pain he suffered in the storms at sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. He failed to keep them safe, poor fools. They ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from home. Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning. That's what I want from Star Wars. An old story told for our modern times. Now that I've ragged on the movie for like 20 minutes and potentially swept aside your personal reasons for liking it, I'm going to talk about the ending of this movie and why I like it for my own very particular reasons. So, a ragtag band goes to Scarif to find the Death Star plans. Jyn gives this inspirational speech.
If we can make it to the ground, we'll take the next chance. And the next. On and on until we win. All the chances are spent.
And then the plan goes into action. Jin, Cassian, and K2 infiltrate the base while the rest of their team provides a distraction down below. Initially, it all seems to be going well. Until...
They've locked down the base. They've closed the shield gate.
What does that mean? We trapped?
Suddenly, the mission goes from escaping with the plans to just doing everything they can to transmit them. At this moment, these characters know they may not survive. K2 is the first to die. He's at a computer bay getting Cassian and Jin vital information as they go into this tower to find the drive with the plans in it. Jin gave him a blaster before they split up.
You wanted one, right?
Your behavior, Jedha, is continually unexpected.
But it wasn't enough. Kay tells them they'll need to climb to the top of the tower and then locks them in that room so the stormtroopers can't get to them.
Kay!
Goodbye!
And from there, characters we know and love start dropping one by one. They need to flip the master switch that's going to let them communicate with the ships outside the shield gate, and so Chirrut, well...
I'm one with the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force is with me.
Come back!
After that, Bodhi manages to reach the fleet and tells them to take down the shield gate so they can receive the plans when Jin transmits them.
Stand by, Rogue One, we're on it!
This is for you, Galen.
Moments later, a grenade gets thrown in there with him. And Baze is still out there, alone on the field with Chirrut. This happens.
The Force is with me, and I'm one with the Force.
And then this happens.
The Force is with me, and I'm with the Force.
And Baze dies, looking at Chirrut. Then it's just Cassian and Jin who are left. They got the plans.
Stardust. That's it.
How do you know that?
I know because it's me.
And as they begin to climb this tower...
Cassian!
So in the end, it's down to Jin. She climbs the tower and gets ready to transmit the plans. Then Krennic finds her, and they face off.
I'm Jyn Erso, daughter of Galen and Lyra. You've lost.
You die with the rebellion.
And then Cassian appears at the last second and shoots him, saving her life. I will say one less nitpick, you guys. I really feel like there's a scene missing here of Cassian waking up on that platform in bad shape and deciding to climb up after her. It would have helped sell him surviving this really ugly fall and magically appearing in the nick of time, but anyways. Cassian and Jin transmit the plans. And there's this moment of breathless satisfaction as they watch the readouts go. Because they did it. They won.
You think anybody's listening?
I do.
At this point, it's clear they're the only ones left. And so the pair of them limp down to the beach.
Your father would have been proud of you, Jin.
And they face their end. Together. And I have to tell you, viewers, I know 50 million people who apparently entered this movie secure in the knowledge that Jyn Erso and all of her friends were going to die because they weren't in the original trilogy, but here's the thing. I didn't. The galaxy is a pretty goddamn big place, and I naively assumed most, if not all of them, would make it out and go to some far corner of the universe at the end of this movie. When the Death Star appeared in the sky over Scarif, I shit you not, I was like, oh no. Because I just didn't think they would die. Because it's Star Wars and a Disney movie, and killing off characters for shock value can be cheap, but damn it all if this didn't work on me. I think it's safe to say it worked on a lot of people. I think Rogue One wouldn't be quite as memorable as it is if they had lived. I think I wouldn't have felt the need to spend 300,000 words giving these characters a happier ending on AO3 if this movie had left them alive. The tragedy of this moment captured me completely in such a way where I love it and wanted to imagine more for these characters than this franchise could provide. People have issues with this movie, and I do too, but I love this moment so much. I love that Jin and Cassian have this sort of non-romantic romance where their relationship is one of the driving forces of the movie, but in their final moments, they don't kiss or anything. They just hold each other close and brace for the end. And I love the expression on Diego Luna's face in those final seconds before the screen whites out. I don't even know what to say about it. I'm not sure what the emotion is there, but that little widening of the eyes really guts me. Funnily enough, in early drafts of the screenplay, not everybody died. I guess because Gareth Edwards wasn't confident that he would be allowed to go to such a dark place for his Star Wars film, but he was given the go-ahead, and so we all got to sit back and watch this happen. And on that note, let's take a minute to talk about headcanons. So there's a phenomenon that happens when fans of the thing spend probably more time thinking about stuff than the writers do. Not because the writers are lazy, but fans can be a little obsessive. I myself tend to hyperfixate on fiction sometimes because real life can be a stressful drag, and sometimes the story really captures my imagination to the tune of 300,000 words. And while some of us might know the term headcanon, let me break it down in case you're new. So the term canon can be defined as the following: a collection or list of sacred books accepted as genuine. So for example, canon would be the story of Exodus as it appears in most religious texts. And a headcanon might be that Moses was real close with his brother Ramses and was kind of sad about what happened to him, like in Prince of Egypt. In fiction, canon is the accepted baseline. What's made officially by the creators, released in theaters or on TV or published in a book is canon. The Lord of the Rings books are canon for that fandom. So is Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald. Headcanon is the stuff that fans make up, like what if Spock and Kirk are actually secretly or not so secretly space boyfriends? What if Legolas was really into hair care products? What if Professor McGonagall was just wanting a nap for 7 books but was instead forced to deal with a bunch of idiot Gryffindors? What if the fox and Fleabag was a metaphor for the priest's emotional baggage? These are headcanons, since they aren't strictly supported by the text, but are instead a fan's interpretation of said text. And those headcanons can inform how they view the final product. Sometimes it's just fun extra stuff, like relationships you want to happen, or a moment you wish to see, or some extra thematic meaning, but headcanons are not text. They can augment the text for a particular viewer or reader, but they aren't a part of the actual canon because otherwise, everybody watching Star Trek would walk away knowing that Spock and Kirk are boyfriends and what type of conditioner Legolas uses. These are the things that writers didn't work into the text. It's what we choose to add to the text. In the case of Rogue One, some of the character development was lacking, sure, but after reading the novelizations and 1 or 2 of the comics and thinking way more about these characters than the writers probably intended, I have enough headcanons to fill in all the gaps and issues in the story and the character development. I can talk at length about the familial relationship between Jyn and Bodhi, or what K2SO thinks of Baze, because I spent a lot of time with these characters and consequently built up a lot of affection for them. Literally, all I have to do is look at a clip from the movie or see one of the actors and I start smiling like an idiot or just going, "Aww," in front of my computer when I see some fan art of the characters, because I have a whole other movie in my head that complements this one and makes it a better movie for me as a viewer. The trick is, I don't think some people realize that what they've done is extrapolated from what's on screen to make better movies in their heads. Your interpretations are totally valid, but they aren't there on screen for everyone to see. Sometimes a film doesn't do the work needed to make a perfectly cohesive thing, but something in it captures us enough that we do the work ourselves and do it happily. But then after all of that, some people still claim the actual movie as it stands is the bestest, greatest thing ever. There's a very important distinction when it comes to viewing film critically that I'm not sure everybody has quite got the hang of. Sometimes there's a difference between a good movie and a movie we like. And sometimes there's a difference between a bad movie and a movie we dislike. For instance, 2001: A Space Odyssey is considered a classic full of unparalleled cinematic genius. I hated watching it though. Or, for another example, I really like the fourth Die Hard. You know, the one with Justin Long? It's a dumb movie where Bruce Willis has ascended to Terminator status and Justin Long reacts like a normal person to the insanity around him and gets told to shut up a lot. I love this movie to pieces. It's very stupid. And while I don't think Rogue One is a dumb or bad movie by any stretch, it's probably not the best of the new films either. I think realistically, it is an okay movie. Maybe even a pretty good one at points. An okay, pretty good movie that I love to the tune of 300,000 words. So now, let's talk about the ending. So after all of that, this movie is almost done, but not quite. See, we've still got the connective tissue that leads into A New Hope and one of the most stressful scenes in cinematic history. So Jyn and Cassian die, and the plans have been uploaded to one of the ships in orbit around Scarif, and we see a couple of soldiers on this ship pull out the drive that contains the plans. And then Darth Vader boards the ship. I think some people like this scene because Darth Vader does a very cool punch-em-up, but for me, this scene is literally the most stressful thing. It still gets me when I rewatch it, and let me tell you why. We just watched a whole lot of people we liked die for this little drive clutched in the hands of some nobody we don't know in a room full of people we don't know. We don't know this guy's name, or that guy, but we watch all of them accept, much in the way that everyone down on the planet just did, that in this moment, it's about more than just their lives. This drive contains the information which will save the rebellion, and as Darth Vader savagely murders these people one by one, it passes from hand to hand, which leads to this guy just shoving his arm through the door and pushing the drive into this guy's hands moments before being killed because it's all he could do, and just like, God. I remember watching this scene in the theater and just muttering to myself like, nope, 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 get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. Finally, that last guy manages to get away and back to his ship, which escapes Darth Vader's clutches, and the brilliance of this scene isn't the cool fight choreography. It's the fact that, even if we know how this story ends, the tension here is undeniable. Honestly, a big part of what I love about Rogue One is how much it got me to care about what happens when we all know how the story ends. It's not about the destination with this movie, it's just about the journey. Although this scene does make the beginning of A New Hope unintentionally hilarious, because when Leia says,
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan.
Just like, can you imagine having the balls to look some guy in the eye after he saw your ship flying away from the scene of the crime and go,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Man, I love Leia. But either way, this guy hands the drive to Leia and we get this final exchange.
What is it they've sent us?
Hope.
And credits. And that's where the movie's real thesis comes into sharp focus. At least for me. We saw already that the movie disagrees with Jyn's earlier stance of passive survival.
It's not a problem if you don't look up.
We don't all have the luxury of deciding when and where we want to care about something.
The idea of ignoring the wrongs of society because it's easy is something this film actively fights against, and we see that with the growth of Jyn's character from passive survivor to ardent freedom fighter. There's a quote from Martin Luther King that I think of sometimes when I think of that growth. He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. It's a damning sentiment, but not an untrue one. Jyn accepted the world she lived in and didn't fight it because she had the option not to. There's also this other quote, which, according to Snopes, has been misattributed to Martin Luther King and is most likely just a paraphrased statement from a speech he made in Selma on March 8, 1965 after Bloody Sunday. Anyways, the quote is, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And I think that is the truest of all for Jyn, and for all of the characters in Rogue One. I think before the film began, they were surviving, but they certainly weren't living. Either from within the Empire or the Rebellion, or from the outside looking in, all of them were keeping silent or turning a blind eye to something that mattered in order to survive, and I think it was killing them. And I'll just remind everybody that Rogue One was released in December of 2016. They definitely didn't know while they were making it how relevant some of the ideas would be, but the idea of fighting against an unjust system because doing otherwise would be an evil, and I don't think I need to spell it out further.
Rebellions are built on hope.
This film has a kind of radical optimism that just really gets to me.
We'll take the next chance. And the next. On and on until we win. And the chances are spent.
Because it's possible to do good, even if you won't reap the benefits of it. The idea of doing what's right simply because it's right is a powerful message. Jyn, Cassian, Bodhi, Chirrut, Baze, and K2SO literally fight to the death for a just cause, knowing they won't see the end result. They won't see the Death Star destroyed and a victorious rebellion. They do it for each other and for the future they won't live to see.
What is it they've sent us?
Hope.
And I'm not saying we all need to go out and become martyrs, but we can all do good in the world without the expectation of getting something back. Go volunteer for a good cause, donate to a charity, or vote in your local and national elections. Because apathy can be an evil in its own right, and doing good, for its own sake, can be an act of rebellion. Also, that fanfic was 300,000 words of inserting the Rogue One crew into the original trilogy because I was sad and wanted more of Jyn and Cassian hugging and stuff. Hey kids, I bet some of you didn't come here for politics, and I might get some comments from people that start with, actually, if you read this book or comic, etc. I know it's going to happen. It's okay. Go off, kids. It's fine. Also, there's suddenly a lot more of you now? Hello, everybody. I've loved reading your comments about Fleabag, and, seriously, it's wild how many people are subscribed to this channel now. Meanwhile, I'm making these videos on a computer that's 6 years old and likes to freeze up every 10 minutes. Sorry for the typos on the Fleabag video. Now, if I can get all the assets together, I really want to do a video on MASH or The Haunting of Hill House or Take Shelter, so we'll see what comes of that. Maybe I'll get distracted by something else. Whatever the case may be, thanks for watching and see you on the next one.